My inclination is not to try to classify things too finely, right? But to actually expose the breadth of KM. And what was a little frightening to my Jana closure is, what was a little frightening to my academic administration was that I came up with 86 courses that would have to be available. And they're saying, wait a minute, this is not a department, this is not a degree, this is a school. And I'm saying, okay.
Yep. Hopefully this is not too much of a stretch, but I'd like to stay on the notion of change management as a competency for a bit. Because it occurs to me that who I am looking for are people who have a teacher's demeanor. Okay, those are the people. I don't even care if they had a liberal arts degree or engineering or whatever. I think they have to have a teacher's demeanor in the sense that for the people I've seen successful in this thing called KM, as change agents, they will tell you they're willing to check their ego at the door. Their success is not their success. Their success comes from the success of others. Mm-hmm. So they're more than willing to make everyone else successful, as a collateral benefit to them. It's like, wow, I sent something out to Madeline that she didn't even know she needed. That kind of demeanor is really powerful because it only helps create a bigger network. Because now Madeline says, well, Carla, she's always sending me good stuff. Maybe you ought to know Carla because she might do the same for you. So minimally, I need that from them, all right? So those who are engaged in power grabbing, I don't need as far as KM capabilities. And also, I just said as a sidebar, I wish I had known Stephen and Carlo in my tenure, 19 years at GM, from 74 to 93, because I think back as to how obvious it is to me today, looking back on it, and it wasn't obvious then. There I was, a fair bit of my time, one industrial engineer out of 200 plus plants around the world, and never occurred that I have other industrial engineering colleagues I could have learned from.
Right.
Never. And it seemed the appropriate way to work. And yet today, and thankfully they're excellent again, I'll bet you they can't think of any other way to work than to share and collaborate. How far across, from the two ends of the continuum could we be?
Yeah, globally.
Yeah. So
Let me just
thank
add
you.
something to that. My dad taught
At General Motors Institute in the late 40s and 1950s, and
That was a little before my time.
Now you know how old I am. But I remember the culture at GM was just incredible because Sunday dinners, he would be with other engineers, other mathematicians, the students would be over at the house. What came out of those discussions at the dinner table, and many of you have heard me say this before, is freeze-dried coffee. Came out of those table discussions. Innovation, using sound waves to cut. You may not know, but the original iron, both of these people have passed away, so you can't go back to them. But the original iron disk drive came out of GM. But my dad's student decided he left school at GM so he could take that and drive out to Los Angeles and sell it to Memorex. That was just an incredibly innovative culture. Just incredible.
I wanted to add something. We've heard Malcolm Gladwell mention a couple of times outliers and Blink, but go back to his original book, The Tipping Point. Is when I'm asked a lot of the time about what does a knowledge manager need to be like, it seemed to me that if you read The Tipping Point, think about the three roles that are listed in there for where something tips over into widespread adoption. There's the connector, the salesman, and the maven. And to me, a knowledge manager is someone that actually does all three of those. It's not any one of them. You're selling, and this gets to your point, Jim, about the change management and teaching. So you're selling all the time to get people to believe in something and adopt it. You're connecting people together. We all do that as part of knowledge management. And the best connectors are the ones that build the big networks that you were mentioning. And then the maven, the role of the person that they ask, that knows something. We play that role. People call you all the time or send you the email where they go, well, how do I do this? Where do I find that? So I think if you have people that you're training, you realize you're going to be doing all of those three things. Those are pretty fundamental.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was actually going to jump in on that, because when you asked the question of are we asking the right question, I think part of what we need to bear in mind is that I don't think there is just one right question. When we look at knowledge management from a perspective, it is part of business, and the way business executes is through its processes. So you're always going to have the questions around the roles and responsibilities, the activities, the information, and the technology. And somehow or another, we're going to have to ask those questions in somewhat of a vacuum and bring them together. Because even on the back end, because you'll see some of the other questions on the other panels actually go to the activities and actually go to the different areas. But one of the key things, and it might have been the wrong order, but one of the key things that you might want to think about, because even when you're thinking about roles, we're actually looking at something that is in progress. So we don't want to discount what those that have done, because it's knowledge management. It might be that some were successful and some were failures or in between. But the whole point is to capture all of that so that when we do elect to build that model, we're taking those things into consideration. So it's going to be all of these stories that finally come up or boil up into this common ground model that we can begin to use not only in new initiatives, but in existing ones. Because, you know, that's a change in and of itself. If you put a change into an organization, I forget the reference, but remember, the change itself can be more the impact of the change can be more catastrophic than the change itself. So in thinking about that, we are going to cover the other questions that become on the table.
I guess what I see is this person is kind of cross-pollination of the business aspect, the IT aspect, and library actually aspect. Because, you know, like listening to some of the issues that you guys have brought up, for instance, the what are your assets? Well, I mean, that's records management. Anyone who's gone to library school knows what that is. I mean, so I guess with developing the curriculum in order to get people the skill set that they need, that's where these three disciplines really need to kind of pull the best out of all of that. Because I'm also thinking about with some of these, you know, the selling aspect is definitely more from the business standpoint, connecting people to each other and to resources from the library standpoint, and then this, you know, the person who is there for help, that teaching is partially from that library standpoint and partially from the IT standpoint, because they do both of those things. So just something to keep in mind.
Hello, I'm Ellen Ensel. I'm the knowledge manager at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is just down the road in its new headquarters building at 23rd and Constitution. I thought maybe I'd use 1 minute to either ask a question or to try to tie a little bit together about what people have been talking about. I don't think there's a problem with a chief knowledge officer having an agenda if the agenda is to make everybody successful and make the organization work in a collaborative way. I do think that if the term is outmoded, it still needs to be on a par with the other chiefs or directors or people who are working towards making the organization important and useful. Doing their own, you know, in their own area. So I don't see any problem with having an agenda if it's a good one. I also think that that a lot of the different things we've talked about and we'll talk about later for involving competencies and what makes a good knowledge professional come from those various areas that Jessica mentioned and that all of you have been talking about. Jacqueline, pardon me, mentioned and that all of you have been talking about. I think that leadership and management, I mean, if you come from various areas, you don't necessarily learn everything. And so as part of what you're developing for curriculum, that would be something to help those of us who either come from, you know, the business perspective or the library perspective or other things too. I think in my organization, change management has been critical. And certain outside pressures sometimes make it a little bit, if not easier, help you to show value to the organization if your organization is faced with budget cuts and you need to show value in the knowledge and things that you're creating. So I see that this panel is laying a good foundation for what we're going to be talking about for the rest of today.